Hello again. The Practical Animal Channel is dedicated to the public understanding of conservation, aiming to give students and career breakers tips that may just give you the edge you need to land that dream animal job. To meet today's guest, we go to Boise in Idaho, USA. In January 1995, Carter Niemeyer, an American government trapper, went from Montana to Alberta, Canada. His mission? To work with a team of Canadian trappers to capture North American grey wolves for reintroduction to the USA. The team, led by Niemeyer, was successful, live capturing wolves which were reintroduced to the States. Wolves then dictated the path of the rest of Niemeyer's life. Niemeyer is a conservation thinker talking today about wolf reintroduction. He is the author of WOLFER in WOLFLAND. He talks about the skills needed to be a wolfer, especially the need for communication between stakeholders. Grey wolves first appeared in the fossil record during the Pleistocene about 1 million years ago. Working with wolves and living the wildlife looks like this. Carter, please can you start by telling me how your own career developed?
Well, I think I was the right person in the right place at the right time. I didn't really plan on working with wolves when I came from the Midwest part of the United States to the West, but my job position put me in a location where when the first wolves started recolonizing from Canada, I seemed to be the designated person to deal with those first recolonizing wolves.
How on earth did it happen at the beginning of the wolf project in Yellowstone National Park? You had to go up to Canada, didn't you?
Well, there was a lot of planning, before the wolf reintroduction occurred in the United States, here in we call it the Northern Rockies region of the lower 48. There was a lot of planning conducted, and the first big step was writing an environmental impact statement. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service produced that document. It was completed in 1994, kind of set out all the parameters of what we hope to accomplish. And then it involved, of course, a lot of communications with Canada, because that was the source of the wolves that were going to be selected for reintroductions into central Idaho and Yellowstone National Park. The next step was to organize a team to go to Canada and catch the wolves that we needed.
Carter, what's your best wolf fact, please?
Well, I think, to me, facts in itself is the answer. There's so much misinformation, so much embellishment, animosity toward wolves that a lot of people end up dealing with mythology more than they do facts. So what I've tried to do in my whole career is just to share facts with people. Some people believe them. Some people trust your information, while others still are in denial, and they just don't buy the whole idea that wolves are good for the United States.
Carter, what's your most treasured possession in your field kit?
Well, it'll probably sound odd, but a knife. So much of my work involved dealing with predation events. A sharp knife and a good sharpener were essential to my work, because it involved skinning out literally hundreds of carcasses, dead livestock, predators included.
Where did you learn your knife skills, Carter?
I've been a trapper since my teenage years for predators. Trapped animals, skinned animals, put up fur pelts, those skills with a knife and those skills just dealing with wild animals started a career for me. 52 years, I was a taxidermist. Being enrolled at Iowa State University involved a lot of those skills that I had developed. Moving out west, working as a government trapper, we killed and skinned thousands of predators over those years. I probably skinned roughly 6,000 fox and coyotes mostly when I was out west. Had lots of opportunities and lots of training and on-the-job experience.
How does somebody become a trapper, a wolf trapper, Carter? I mean, is it necessary to become a muskrat trapper first or a beaver trapper first, and then you kind of progress your training?
Yes, well, I started trapping rodents, pocket gophers, when I was 9 years old. And then I went through the steps, I guess, trapped muskrat and mink. Then I became a fox trapper and took lessons from one of the best fox trappers in the Midwest. Paid my way through college, actually, trapping and skinning animals. Took those skills out west and just kept using them and things went from there.
What jobs are there for wolf specialists in the Rockies today?
Well, there's more possibilities for people or students these days. For 10 years, I was the only wolf management specialist for the Northern Rockies region. And then by the time I retired in 2006, and then when wolves were taken over by state managers, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, to start with, there were a lot of wolf specialists hired. Most of them were college students, and I recommend anybody that's thinking about going into this kind of field, a master's degree, I would think would be essential, more so than a bachelor's degree. The jobs are cherished, they're highly competitive. A lot of these jobs are advertised, and hundreds sometimes apply for those jobs. Between getting a good education and then people have asked me, how do I get a step up on everyone else? It's if you have some trapping skills, if you have skills working in rural areas, growing up on a farm or a ranch, that helps. When I was a young man, I traveled with veterinarians and just learned about livestock. I worked on farms all my young life. All of those job skills that you bring to applying for a wolf specialist job, I think will be helpful and give you an edge over your competitors.
Carter, why is a master's better than a bachelor's to become a wolf specialist?
Well, a lot of the wolf specialty work, it's highly technical. Besides trapping, things like that, which everybody considers sometimes the fun part, they think. But you have to be skilled with research, being able to be a good writer, understand statistics, understand collecting data. Being a graduate student gives you all of those skills. Then, there's all these technical things that you have to do, the chemical immobilization training, which involves a lot of drugs and sedatives and so forth. And there's the trapping skill, but then a large portion of my work involved helicopter darting. So you had to become familiar with safety around aircraft, helicopters, go to more training on tow-in landings and how to get in and out of them safely. Shooting dart guns from a helicopter, you're flying at your speed and chasing a wolf that's running 35 miles an hour. So you have to kind of understand ballistics and velocities and projectiles and all of those things. So it helps to be a good thinker, but I think grad school does prepare you for the research aspect more so than an undergrad.
How would you describe wolf conservation in the Rockies today?
Political, controversial, and polarized. We're almost 30 years into wolf recovery in the Northern Rockies region. Sometimes I'm not sure making any progress. The stakeholder groups, ranchers, rural folks, they're not real happy with, content with, or accept the idea that reintroducing wolves is a good idea because they fear for their livestock. You have hunters and trappers who think that the wolves need to be controlled, managed, killed. And there's still the belief, that they're devouring all the deer and the elk and the moose, which is absolutely not true. Put yourself in my shoes, working with people on all sides of the spectrum, trying to communicate and be unbiased and share the scientific facts. There's a real trust issue, and you got to really work hard at that. Getting trust between people to even talk in the first place. But there's this continual resistance. A lot of people don't want wolves around, and the old saying, the further away you live from wolves, the more you like them. The closer you live to wolves, the more you dislike them. Advocacy groups that are promoting wolf recovery and want to see wolves in where they are now and in many more places. They think that's great, but the rural communities where wolves do interact with livestock and on the landscape where all these people farm and ranch, they don't particularly care for that.
Carter, what are the basic principles behind wolf capture and translocation? I'm thinking of the Canada Yellowstone part of the project back in the 90s.
Well, I was one of the first biologists to be sent up there. I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Wildlife Services as a trapper more so. But when I got up there, it was again a lot of distrust, a lot of misunderstanding, and it involved working with trappers who had registered trap lines in Canada. And those trap lines had to be respected, even with the government. To go in and do any kind of wolf captures, there had to be an agreement with or contract with the recreational trappers in Canada. So when I got up there, that was my job, was to introduce myself to these trappers. Some had previous contacts and had filled out contracts to receive compensation for catching live wolves. All of the wolves caught in Canada initially were radio collared and released using neck snares. They weren't foothold traps at all. I spent probably close to a month up there, along with other biologists who come up and join me. And we traveled with the trappers on the registered trap lines. They had out snares, and when a wolf was snared, we immobilized it immediately, trying to keep them from being strangled. We had stops on the snares that were able to keep the cable from closing completely tight on their neck. So we initially snared these wolves, radio collared and released them in the first phase of the capture. And then the first of the year, beginning in 1995 in January, first year we went to Hinton, Alberta, which is east of Jasper National Park in Alberta, and caught wolves there using helicopters. First of all, we took the helicopters up and located all these radio collared wolves that we had caught in neck snares and released. They're called Judas wolves because they kind of betray the location of their packs they're affiliated with. So we flew out and GPSed all these packs, and then flew out and captured as many of pack members as we could catch each day. Those were put in kennels and held in captivity. When we had a load to go, about 15 wolves at a time, we would load them on a Forest Service cargo plane, radio collared them, and then they were flown back. Great Falls, Montana, Missoula, Montana. The ones that went to Yellowstone were hauled by horse trailer from the airport in Great Falls. The ones in Missoula were transported by truck into Idaho. Then there's two terms we talk about. There's the hard release and soft release of wolves after they're captured. A hard release is like we did in central Idaho. They're driven to these remote locations. The kennels are loaded on a sled behind a snow machine or snowmobile and driven into the wilderness, the Frank Church Wilderness here in Idaho. And a hard release is when you just open the kennel doors and you let the wolves go. There's no more confinement, no acclimation or anything. With soft release that happened in Yellowstone National Park, the wolves were taken down in horse trailers and then transported, sedated into 1 acre holding pens and held for roughly a month or two to acclimate them and try and get rid of that any homing instinct they may have to want to go home. And then they were released. And then after that, it became a matter of tracking the wolves using these tracking collars on them and watching what they did and measuring reproduction and watching the population begin to grow and disperse.
What sort of veterinary services did the wolves brought from Canada to Yellowstone require?
Well, that's an excellent question because there's a lot of veterinarians involved on site. We brought, I believe, roughly 4 of our veterinarians from the United States up. Most of those individuals worked for state fish and game agencies, and one veterinarian worked for Yellowstone National Park. So these people took leave from their regular jobs and came up. And then Canada had, I would say, at least a half a dozen of their veterinarians on site too. Going out and doing the actual capture, with dart guns and loading the wolves up from these snowy locations and hauling them back, that's kind of up to us as the pilot and gunners to see to their welfare. But once they were brought back to the handling compounds, then the veterinarians took over. They examine them to see that they're not injured from any dart injuries. They look for other injuries they may have, from being, in fights with one another or any other kind of old injuries. At the same time, blood samples are drawn because some of the serum is saved for looking at disease analysis, see what kind of diseases these wolves may have carried. Fecal samples are collected, looking to see what kind of internal parasites. Then they're examined on the outside for external parasites. Then they were given a regime of vaccines, concerns about distemper, things like that. Then the veterinarians put the collars on, applied the ear tags. They put pit tags in them so that they could be scanned for identification later. And then the wolves were, after sedation and handling like that, they were taken out and put in kennels where they were monitored daily to make sure that they had adequate water. We put blocks of ice in the kennels so that the ice was available for them to chew on. Same thing when they were put in transport kennels on the cargo planes, blocks of ice were put in their kennels so that they could chew on that ice also. So kind of wind it down. I mean, we had veterinary presence from the time these animals were brought in from the field until they were put on the cargo plane, and then same way on the other end, once they were put in kennels in the park, they were monitored, just making sure that we lowered any risk of harm or danger to them and gave them the most humane, ethical handling that we could.
What are good questions that new entrants into wolf conservation as a career can ask at an interview?
Well, I think one of the most important questions they would want to inquire about would be just understanding the playing field and the job that they're asking to apply for. It's controversial. It's, in my career, I think I heard it all. And, I joke with people that once upon a time I was sensitive, but I lost my sensitivity. being such a controversial, polarized situation with wolves and the negativity toward them by so many people, you really got to be prepared to receive insults, be challenged, be questioned. You need a lot of self-esteem. You need a lot of self-confidence. You need to be unbiased, and you need to be honest. It's a tough job. I never found it easy, but I also found it enjoyable to me because I had those strengths. And I tended to get along with rural people. To get their trust, they have to believe in you and know that you understand growing livestock and what it's about and animal husbandry, and understand that their families are doing this for a living. So you got to be sensitive, be a good listener. And if you think you can do all those things and handle the technical parts, that might be the job for some young person to give it a try.
What should a young person wear for an interview, Carter?
Well, generally speaking, most applicants dress up, come in with a good appearance. For me, casual dress is what would impress me rather than a three-piece suit. Overdressing probably won't harm you any, but knowing the job you're interviewing for, I think casual dress would impress me as much as anything, because once you get into wolf management, you'll be wearing clothing, to impress audiences and crowds, but a lot of times you're going to be out in the mud and the blood, and it's not a three-piece suit job.
What skills can a trapper bring to wolf conservation?
Well, for me, it was important that I be a successful trapper. So when I came to the job, I had a lot of skill and a lot of captures behind me. When I was a recreational fur trapper, I trapped hundreds of fox and coyotes. Catching wolves is not a whole lot different. It's just readjusting to wolf behavior and realizing wolves are fewer and far between. They're not as readily available and easy to find as fox and a coyote is. So you have to have those skills because you're going to have to demonstrate them when you get in the job. And there's a lot of people, rural people that are skeptical. Here comes this guy in the yard, and you confirm that a sheep or a calf was killed, and you tell them, well, we're going to trap that wolf and put a radio collar on it and release it. That's what we did on those first early years when I was working. And there's a lot of people dubious. They just kind of look at you and wonder, yeah, you tell us this, but we got to see it. So you got to be productive. You got to be successful. And when you are, and when you go out there and you catch that wolf, put a collar on, and you invite the rancher along in the morning, and he sees it out there in the trap, and you have it sedated, and you handle it and do your thing, the trust level grows immensely at that time. And suddenly you're invited in for coffee, and you're invited in for meals, and you're invited to stay in the bunkhouse, and a lot of the barriers drop. So being a skilled trapper and one that can produce when you have to, I mean, that to me is everything.
Where do our knowledge gaps lie? What do we still need to know about wolf conservation in the Rockies?
Well, scientifically, I think wolves have been studied to death. I think we have volumes, thousands of pages in journals of our knowledge of wolves. The knowledge gap still seems to be the lack of communication between people and stakeholders. There's what the scientists know, and then there's what the ranchers believe, what the hunters believe, what the wolf advocates believe.
Can you suggest a research topic for an undergraduate thesis on wolves?
Well, the research topic I would like to see happen would be students able to work in some rural locations on ranches in particular, where we could better document the interactions of wolves and wolf packs with livestock. and take it from spring to fall and look at all the causes of livestock death and look at the influence of predation, the presence of predation and the lack thereof, because that's the most challenging part of my job, was always trying to confirm and verify. So I think that's some of the research I'd like to see, is just more documentation on site of what really goes on the ground. You just look at a herd of livestock from spring to fall, and how many die, how many end up missing, what happens to them, and what degree is predation a factor versus all the other causes of death. Predation is actually pretty minuscule to livestock growers. It's significant to the individual who's losing the livestock, but it's not like wolves and even other large predators driving people out of business or devastating herds or anything like that.
Carter, you are a wolf expert and specialist and author of 2 books on wolves. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal Channel. Carter Niemeyer.
Been my pleasure. Thank you.